Welcome everyone to yet another SDN Community Voices, our weekly touch point between you, the followers and members of the SDN, the Service Design Network, and all of these amazing voices that we have throughout the design community. My name is Felipe, and as always, I will be your ambassador and host. And today I'm very excited to bring Daniel to the talk to talk a little bit about the intersection between service design and systems thinking and how it can change a little bit the way we can work forward with service design. But before we dive in, a quick reminder to drop your questions in the chat. We will address them during our final Q&A segment, but don't be so self-conscious. Just drop them as soon as they come. But now let's bring Daniel to the stage and ask him to introduce himself. Hey, welcome.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So yes, my name is Daniel Tuitt. So I work as a service designer, but also I embed systems thinking and innovation into my practice. I'm currently working with a brand new airline called Riyadh Air, who will be launching at some point this year. So we're very excited about that. I'm heading up the service design experience strategy piece there. But before that, I've spent over a decade working in all different types of organizations, the likes of Lego, Lloyds Bank, Barclays, the BBC, a whole host of different organizations and government entities.
Yeah. And I think just to start us off, you said there are kind of two very different kind of works, right? You were a freelancer for the longest time, and now you're working in a big corporation. How was that kind of change for you? How did it change a little bit the mindset, the way you work, or even like the ambience of working with a different type of project overall?
It's definitely something I'm reflecting on a daily basis, to be honest. I think the biggest learning from moving from being a contractor or consultant to corporate is understanding the internal systems, the politics, the structures, the systems, how things get done internally. Where before I had an outside-in lens of viewing on things where you'd go in, you'll see one specific problem, you're there to solve it, and then you, in most cases, jump back out again. Now you're there and you get to see things really develop over time. So working for Riyadh Air, but also moving back into permanent has really changed my way of thinking about problems, and also how do I collaborate with the people inside the organization, but also as the partners as well.
Yeah. And then jumping a little bit to the topic of system thinking, how do you think that changes your perspective on system thinking ongoing? Now you're kind of part of the cog there a little bit. Does it make it harder or easier for you to work from this more systemic perspective or embed it into your service design?
So there's two thoughts there. I think as someone that naturally has a more holistic way of thinking about things and not just thinking about it from one specific area, I still have that natural interest to ask questions around if we change something, if we implement anything. I can't talk too much about Riyadh Air at the moment just because we're still very much in stealth mode, but a lot of things we're doing is quite exciting. A lot of it is new, but we have to consider how does it impact the aviation space beyond. I'm currently in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh at the moment, and the whole country's going through a huge amount of change at the moment. That's going to impact people from a local, national Saudi Arabia level, but also globally as we start expanding. So it's about thinking about all the different dependencies on that side of things. The second element is, yes, I'm more in-house now, but my role of connecting people together, and this is where the service design element comes in, is really important. It is still trying to shift away from how is my role or how is my department impacted, and shift. I'll get people around the business to shift to, okay, what is the bigger picture? It's not just about one department, one area, what one person cares about in terms of one lens. It's how do we connect all those dots together, think about it from different levels.
Mm-hmm. And I know maybe there's a lot of secrecy, so you cannot maybe talk so much about it, but do you have one example maybe of what you brought in from your previous work to now where you're working right now?
Yes, I can talk about previous work. I think that's a little bit easy for me to do in most cases. So a lot of my work has involved a number of different well-known banks. I won't name them by hand, but there was a piece and case I worked with where I was involved in helping how to look at home insurance and rentals from a completely different perspective. And we wanted to figure out what are some of the financial needs for those rental people, the landlords, and people around the system, but also how to expand as well. But also thinking about some of the social economic areas. This was when the conflict with Russia and Ukraine was just about starting, and we realized that there was a huge migration of people from Ukraine that were traveling around Europe. How is that going to impact people over time? There was one factor of they're moving quickly from their homes, which they've been in for most of their lives. They might need documentation to open up a new bank or to get a new job, for example, or get a new house or place to live. The big issue in those cases is if everything you know and love has disappeared, what does that mean for you? How do you start transferring that whole process? What are some of the policies we have to think about? Environmentally, how does that impact people? From a social side of things, usually when we think about people from Ukraine, these are, in most cases, highly educated people that are Christian, people that align with a lot of general thoughts and feelings within the UK itself. So how easily can they integrate with the system of the UK very quickly? And a lot of people from the Ukraine want to go back to their own places once the conflict has been resolved as well. So the biggest issue was not just trying to look at it from a how do we support people in terms of the rental market, but there were all these other factors and second and third order effects that came into place. I do have another example, which is a little bit more cheerful, not about conflict or wars, if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, the second one is, so I did a lot of work with OpenIGO. So I think most people know IGO, which is basically one of the biggest innovation agencies in the world. They coined the term design thinking many years ago. And most people know Tim Brown and a whole host of other people. OpenIGO used to be the social enterprise element of their business. So they used to focus on things such as education, food, equality. And one of the key roles I had was I was a part of the London chapter. Myself and a whole host of amazing other individuals used to work with the London chapter to think about some of these complex issues, and one of them was around food systems. So how do we design better food systems for 2050? So thinking about it from different levels and considering not just looking at it from a London perspective, but how do we learn from different areas and expertise from around the world. We use a lot of elements of open innovation, which is how do we get smart people from outside of industry expertise to come together to solve these problems, rather than just having the smartest person in an organization, or going past that whole idea of not all the smartest people live or work in the same place or environment. So that shift was really important. And we were able to, it's okay, I didn't hear anything. We were able to pretty much apply systems thinking to think about how do we combat how do we solve some of those challenges, which was really key.
Okay. And I think here it comes a little bit the topic of wicked problems, right? So you're talking about education, food, equality, all of those problems that are very complex in nature. And when it comes to tackling them, you kind of have to go through a route of either understanding them from a systemic perspective, because they're so interconnected with other services, other problems, other situations, and other cultural settings also, but also from a futures perspective. As you're saying, you're thinking about 2050, right? So how do you think those two things, like wicked problems and also kind of futures thinking, come into play on your day-to-day work, or even on the work that you have been doing so far?
It all depends on the maturity of the organization or the problem we're trying to solve. So when we come to wicked problems, one, we can't solve it alone. We have to think about what are some of the different perspectives and lenses around looking at wicked problems in the first place. A lot of these things are unclear, not really defined, unique. There's not one right or wrong way to solve it. But when we try to think about how do we solve those issues, it's how do we come together and think about those problems rather than almost battling each other over time. And I think one of the things you said before, Felipe, was really important. When we think about systems thinking, there's a whole chain, there's a bigger picture we have to always consider over time. It's not just thinking about things in isolation, it's where is there a clear vision of what the bigger problem is. How do we think about understanding the system before we start creating any change in any way? So really good question.
Yeah, and I think it really goes to this perspective of what you're saying. All the problems are together, the people are together, understanding those things. But what came to mind also here right now, it's about our own biases. And we, of course, carry biases is this kind of innate kind of behavior. There's nothing we can do about it besides working with other people and then kind of fighting our own biases together, right? So how do you have an example or kind of a situation where you found yourself realizing, oh, this is a bias of mine, or somebody else realized that, and then you used something to work around it?
I think going back to myself, I'm always fighting my own biases. It's either one thing I've worked on a similar type of project, or I've seen this many times before. And I think as designers sometimes, or even systems thinkers, well, less systems thinkers, but sometimes as designers, serve designers, strategic designers, depending on what we want to call ourselves at any time, there's always an issue or a level of thinking around, oh, design is going to solve all the different problems out there. And we can't do it alone. We can't do it in a silo. It's also understanding that, especially when it comes to wicked problems, they're so dynamic. There's always going to be something that's coming into place. And it's a lot of our role sometimes as the people that are facilitating these complex issues and getting people to come together to get alignment, to think about how do you take a step back. We already have some of our existing biases around a problem or around a solution, or what has worked in the past, or why it would not work in the future. But maybe we can think about, how can we solve this together? How can we understand all the nuances that come into solving complex issues and tackling systems? And sometimes there might be things that are indirectly going to impact any outcome we're thinking about. And that's really when you start winning the day and getting people on your side. It is a mix between around understanding what's in it for them. So some people are just naturally focused on, I've got this target, I've got pressure from a certain individual, I only care about my department because that's why I get my bonuses are linked to this, or my short-term vision is around X, Y, and Z. That's fine. Helping them understand and what they need to achieve is really important, but connecting that to the bigger picture is also key as well. And I find that sometimes it's the hardest element. It's how do you speak the right language to some of your key stakeholders inside and outside of your organization, so you can make sure that you start almost connecting them to the right people so they can start seeing the bigger picture. And this takes time.
Yeah, I was reading recently a book about the brief history of service design that is also Medium. And I remember something really stuck with me, that we are not the experts, we're just talking with the experts, right? So I think it goes back to facilitation, as you're saying. We're not there to solve the problems, but really help people understand how they can solve it themselves in a way. And then it becomes really important that you have the right people in the room to work around the problem, and not just thinking, as you're saying, that design is going to be the Hail Mary and save everybody from the whatever is coming, right?
It's funny you say that. I literally said the exact same thing to a colleague today, where I said, I'm not an expert, I'm just here to connect the dots. But also, I always try to lead with this as well. It's how do I make your life easier? And sometimes it's just making sure that you have space, or you ensure that they understand the bigger picture. Because at the end of the day, they only care about their job and their role because they're the experts in that domain. But my job is to connect them with other people so you can remove friction for the short term and the long term.
Yeah, and I think this connection becomes also a ongoing learning, right? We're always learning from different disciplines, different people, different cultures, and everything. Do you have a couple of those learnings that you had throughout the way that really stuck with you and the way you work right now?
Yeah, so there's two ways of looking at this. I think coming into the industry of aviation, I've got very limited experience at all. So I always come within a beginner's mindset to say, I don't know this, or ask simple questions. The aviation space is riddled with acronyms, which is always, I'm always scratching my head. I'm always the one that's putting up my hand asking to just simplify, what do you actually mean? Because people sometimes use complexity on the other side as a defense mechanism to say, this is too complex to explain, or we can't deal with this now because it's too complex. Let's talk about it later on. I think coming from a mixed background, where I've worked in so many different industries and I've worked with so many different organizations, helps me able to connect those dots to see what we can learn from other industries and other practices as well. So maybe I'm working in aviation at the moment, but I want to think about how do we apply retail, for example, insurance, finance, government. There's all these key learnings that can actually benefit the way we work, which is really key.
Yeah, I think I also learn a lot from different people throughout the community voices, because one of the things that I love about the most in service design is so many different backgrounds, right? So you really learn how people went to figure out that service design, what was they're doing or what they wanted to do, and really carry on these learnings from different disciplines, finance, architecture, whatever it is. And so much we can learn from also those different disciplines on our own practice.
Exactly. It's an ongoing journey as well. I think I forgot the adage, but you're never too old to learn. I probably butchered it now, to be completely honest. But I love this idea of when people are leaving an organization as well, it's almost like you're burning a library, because there's so much tacit knowledge that's leaving that can't always be documented all the time. So it's how do you build those unique connections with people inside and outside of your organization, make sure that you're connecting those dots. You're not just thinking about solving a problem in one specific way. You're getting different people from all around the system to come together. I think that's really key.
Yeah, and I think it ends up making also the whole process, but also the final product so much more enriched, because you get so many more important perspectives than just the selected ones that might be the ones that always come in those type of decisions, right?
Exactly. It's important, and this goes back into facilitation as well, which is an element or a section of what service design is. And system thinking is also important as well, is making sure that the people that have a lack of power in the room have a voice. So I did a project many years ago, well, not too many, probably about 2 or 3 years ago now. This is probably on the service design network case studies, but we did some work with Power to Change as part of Climate Lab. And we were thinking about how do we enable underrepresented community members and businesses have a voice, and when it comes to funding. And usually there's a power dynamic there where you have these funders, governments, media that have more of this power in terms of the decisions they make. But what about the people that are underrepresented in terms of the local business owners, the change agents within those communities themselves, the community leaders? They've got a different type of soft power that's really important that needs to come to light. So it's how do you build an even ground for those people to have conversations, to understand how do we create a better, fairer and more accessible funding model. So that was really important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times they might even be the people that are indirectly impacted. So they are not maybe the first ones, or even directly impacted by different decisions, right? And if you don't put them into the conversation, then maybe 5-10 years down the line, you start having a lot of different problems, because you don't realize that you are impacting those people that much because you didn't even include them in the conversation to begin with.
Exactly. And this goes back into when you think about forecasting and how do you look at systems thinking to start predicting the future as well. We do use a lot of techniques where we start thinking about, okay, what does a certain environment or certain problem look like in the next 5 to 10 years time in terms of change? So that's going to be really critical. It's not just impacting our business or our department, but how does this impact the community? How does this impact the wider ecosystem of our partners, for example? And I think another thing we haven't really talked about at the moment is the planet. So the environment itself, they're a key stakeholder in this. When we think about systems, usually it's just the humans or the users or the customers, but there is a wider ecosystem. We've got to think about communities, government, maybe future people that are not even factored into the situation yet. So what would you, Felipe, if you have kids in 20 years time, what would that look like? Or in 10 years time, what would that look like? And how will they be impacted by a new system change?
Yeah, and I think, as you're saying, the planet is something that we always have to consider, right? We are
Mm.
all the 8 billion people that are living here, and all the other species that we're all living in this ball of dirt rolling in the space. So if we don't consider those aspects also when we're designing, a lot of times we don't even realize, for example, the digital systems really feel digital here. We're not doing anything for the climate, right? But all of those digital things are in a server somewhere, and they're using energy, they're using water, they're using resources. So there's always the need to consider those. So how do you come about a little bit bringing the planet or bringing sustainability more to the conversation when you're designing?
I think that's a really important point. So, whatever, for at least last 5 years or so, I've been really critical in trying to bring in the conversation around sustainability and the planet as a key stakeholder within itself. There are a lot smarter people that are doing a better job than myself, but it's always understanding what are some of the long-term ramifications. And I think about this as, I know it's a little bit odd, someone speaking from someone that's running a brand new airline from an aviation perspective, but we do care about sustainability. We're never going to get to net zero, we know that, but we also think about it from how do we consider things such as food, thinking about waste around the office space, for example, even elements such as uniform. This all has a negative impact on the planet in some way, but also we think about the local environment in terms of our footprint over time. So there are always considerations. So whenever we have a new business decision internally, we always think about the planet as well as one of our key pillars. And that's across the whole end-to-end experience when we think about the employee experience, the guest experience, what type of impact that will make us for ourselves as a company as well. That's going to be really critical.
Yeah, and I think that's also very important because a lot of times there's the thought of just the CO2 emissions, which is a great place to start, but the whole dawn on the economics brings so much more things, right? You cannot think just
Mhm.
about the CO2 emissions as the only metric for sustainability. So maybe for an aviation company, CO2 emissions might not be the best metric, but there's a lot of other ways that you can think about sustainability.
Exactly. You need to have that broader, more holistic feel as well. So I completely agree. So
Mm.
that's really key, and it's an ongoing conversation. It's as we start flying in the next couple of years or so, talking more about Riyadh Air, we might have a couple of key metrics for sustainability around how we think about things. But as we start growing as an organization, things are going to change. We're going to have different fleets. That's going to impact how we think about sustainability and other metrics as well, from a tactical, from innovation, from a strategic element. It's connecting those all together and making sure that we provide the right people with all the information they need to make those decisions. And it just doesn't come from one specific point. It comes from different elements and different perspectives.
Yeah, 100%. And for now, I'm also open to any questions that people are watching us right now might have. We're going to take them now and answer them live. I'm opening also because I already have a question from, I'll bring it up, from Maria. She's asking, Daniel, any recommendations on techniques or courses to look at for this holistic approach? Thanks.
So it goes into, I don't know. So hi Maria, I don't know exactly what industry you focus on or how mature your organization is in terms of adopting system thinking. I wouldn't go into the deep end of creating these detailed, convoluted system maps that have all these different, let's say, feedback loops and all the different negative and positive elements to the maps itself. Start simple. Start to think about how do we think beyond just our four walls and who do we need to invite in terms of the conversations. So that's one technique. It's all about having those conversations. I'd say another element of being a service designer is it's all about building connections. It's a cup of coffee. It's almost being a business psychologist in some way, where you're going in and just listening about the problems, and then you're connecting the dots to see how can we solve problems. Or to actually use an analogy, maybe I might be dating myself, but there's this famous show a few years ago called Columbo, and it was about this detective who would always go around asking questions, not knowing things, even though he knew the answer. And what he would do is just he would get the answer out of people, whether they've committed a crime, for example, or you needed some information. I wouldn't say a set of designs will do the same thing, but we're there listening, asking questions, framing things to get people to think about things in different ways. Courses, I'd say, if you think about the systems innovation platform, they've got a lot of free resources, and they've got a couple of recordings and courses as well. So that's a great resource in terms of making you think more holistically.
And is there maybe any tools that you use on your day-to-day also that maybe people can start having a look to play around or prototype around?
I'm trying to think of the most simple tool to use because I don't want people to jump into too much complexity. I'd say start with the iceberg model. So it's helping you look at things at different layers, and then you can look at the level of complexity there. That's a really good one. Another thing as well is, as well as just thinking holistically, it would be, what can you learn from other industries? You've already talked about this before, but think about how they're solving problems from industries that are maybe connected to your own. That's always a good way to start and think about things.
Yeah, while we wait for some other questions, I would just ask a follow-up to that. So any books maybe, because I think at least for me as a designer, a lot of times books is a great way just to start off. So was there something, or even like what was the first thing that came to you that you said, okay, system thinking, something that I should get into?
It's funny, I read books, but I don't actually specifically read books about systems innovation, funny enough. I try to think about it from a mindset perspective. It's thinking holistically is learning about different industries and different things around the world. So thinking about economy, think about policy, thinking about some of the legal regulation changes, what are some of the cultural elements and shifts. Being really open to that and trying to connect the dots is really important. And that's when you start seeing the patterns and the trends over time. That's where, in my personal opinion, you can start thinking in a more systematic way. If that's about reading the theory, it's about understanding the real world and then connecting some of the big challenges around us at this stage.
Yeah, we have actually a suggestion here from G. Brett to a book called Systemic Service Design. I don't know if you saw it already.
Yes, I have it somewhere. I have seen it. I have read it in the past, but that's a really good book as well. So I'll suggest that. Go ahead.
So here's a good suggestion already from G. Brett. Thank you for a suggestion. And with that, we're coming to the end of our time together. Thank you so much, Daniel, for all your insights.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Felipe. It's a pleasure. I'll see you next time.
Yes. And to everybody that joined us online, thank you so much for interacting, for being here. As I always say every time, this community voices only happen because of you, because of the people that are here working, seeing and interacting with service design and being curious about it. So thank you very much. And I'll see you again, actually, this Thursday. We have another guest coming in. So stay tuned in our social media here with the link tree. We're going to give you some more details just this afternoon about our new guest for the SDN Community Voices. Thank you very much and have a good day.